All right. Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of the People Progressing podcast. We'll have Rob Wrubel on with us today, and Rob's written 3 books that we'll get into, and is a financial planner, but he's a specialized financial planner in some senses, where he works with families with special needs children and so forth. And just really excited to get this out there and get what Rob's doing out to the public and kind of help people out. So Rob, thanks for coming on today. And I just kind of start this off by having you kind of explain where you grew up, what you did as a kid, and kind of, where you went to college and those kind of things, so people can kind of connect with you.
Sure, Joe. I appreciate you having me on today, and just chime in as I'm running through anything in case I'm missing part of what you want to talk about, because I know you have an active audience and they're used to kind of a certain background on people like me as we're talking. And so, again, I appreciate the time today. We talked a couple of weeks ago and really looking forward to the conversation with you. I grew up outside of New York City. I'm from New Jersey, or as we used to say, New Jersey. I was just back there last week. I came home and I can turn on the accent a little bit more now. I've lived in Colorado Springs for 23 years or so, but I'm still a Bruce Springsteen fan, Yankees fan, and Devils fan. And so those are my sports teams. Yeah, but I grew up in New York City. We grew up about 6 miles from the George Washington Bridge. And I'm one of 3 boys and mom and dad. And we lived on a street that we used to call it a dead end. I think now the term is cul-de-sac. And we grew up, I thought I was in nature all day long. And then we had New York City right near us. So we would go in for museums and shows when we had the chance. We'd go in for, Central Park and restaurants and things like that. But again, I grew up 6 miles. I was on a half-acre lot with trees at the back. And I thought I was in the wilderness. And frankly, to me, it was just a slice of perfection. It wasn't quite Opie from whatever that show was with Ron Howard, but we were on our bikes all the time. We had freedom to roam around and move around. And I know times were a little bit different then. Kids had a little bit more freedom, and parenting was a little bit different. But as I grew up there, and like I said, I just loved it. I was just back in that town last week. We had spring break here in Colorado Springs. Drove by my old house, went to the old fields where I played baseball and soccer, and took my kids around and did a home tour, I guess is what we did. So it was a good time.
You mentioned growing up in New York City, and you did mention Opie. So I have to touch on that first, because that's like my favorite show of all time. If you can see in the background, let me go this way. There's Don Knotts from the Andy Griffith Show right there.
Yeah.
So that kind of touched my heart right there. But going to all those different things like plays and all those kind of things, how did that kind of shape you, and having that freedom as a kid a little bit more than, like you said, more than kids really have today, because so many things are going on in kids' lives that they don't really have that freedom to get on their bike and go explore and do all those kind of things anymore. So what kind of influence did that have on you to where you are now?
That's a great question, and one I haven't thought too much about. In some ways, it gave us the chance to figure it out on our own. We didn't have phones with all the world's information right at us, or computer right there where we could research things. We went on our bikes. We had to be home for dinner for most nights. And in those hours between school and dinner, or on the weekends between whatever activities and dinner, we had to figure out our social arrangements, what kids were going to meet where, if there were any problems, how to handle it on our own. So I think in many ways, it gave us the sense that we can kind of do whatever we need to do. And if it got really bad, we could go get help, right? We could call the police. I guess we never had to do that, or find a parent. It was a small enough area. Somebody could run to somebody's house and figure it out. So I think the biggest thing was the sense of independence that we got, that I hope I'm raising my children with today. And I hope most people have today. And I just feel like the conditions were set for it. And we were really lucky, obviously, to be in those conditions and live that way. So I think that was a big piece of it. We didn't have, our parents were present in our lives. We were lucky as far as that goes too. But what is the term today? Helicopter parent. We weren't there every minute of everything we had to do. Yeah. And so that probably that sense of independence and we can figure it out is the biggest things I've carried with me.
And the thing I see a lot is nowadays is the adults in kids' lives really have a hard time letting kids go through adversity. they kind of want to go in there, and you mentioned the helicopter parent, but it's I think it's important, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, because I kind of had the exact same childhood as you did, but we had to face adversity kind of a lot on our own in those days. And nowadays it seems like the adults in these kids' lives kind of swoop in and just shield them from adversity. And I really think that's one of the best ways to grow and progress as a person, is overcoming and learning how to overcome adversity without somebody there to kind of spoon feed you through it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and adversity can be big and small. And, we had lots of little things that came up. And I was lucky enough not to have real big adversities.
Yeah.
Nobody,
Yeah.
No parent passed away, or we
Right.
didn't have to move suddenly from a loss of a job or something like that. Yeah, but I think it's that skill building that you get from little ones. And I mean, yeah, 2 times I was on a bicycle and I flipped over the handlebars and hurt myself. And one time I was riding no-handed down the street and I was looking at something else. And the other time was the first time on a bike. And there were not first time on a bike, but first time on a 10-speed bike.
Yeah.
And so little things like that, where I had, I don't think I needed stitches in either case, but I was kind of beat up. I ended up hopping back on my bike, getting home, and probably at some point somebody helped me clean up because I probably didn't know what to do. So again, not a major adversity in life
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
things go, but one where I was like, yeah, I didn't call somebody from my cell phone to have me picked up while I was sitting by the side of that curb. I just picked myself up and kept going. And I've had lots of little lessons like that add up to being able to adapt and grow and change as life goes on.
No doubt. And so when you went to high school and college back east as well, is that true? Is that where you went to college?
Yeah. So I went to high school in New Jersey, went to the public school in my town. And then I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, which is a small liberal arts school, 2,000, 2,500 students, something like that. And again, even there, I think it was an opportunity to learn how to learn. I'm a big believer in liberal arts. I know some people are much more, hey, I want to go into accounting, or I want to become a doctor. And you take a much more not rigorous, but structured approach. I studied a lot of different things and learned how to think and grow. And I'll get into my career path, which is not a straight line either. But yeah, so in Connecticut is where I went to college.
Yeah, let's dive into that career path, because it's a very interesting one. It intrigues me, to say the least. What was your first job out of college, and kind of take us through that process to where you're at now? Because what I want people to understand is what you're doing now is your passion. You're in your purpose and your passion. You probably weren't always in your purpose and passion in some of the career fields that you were at. What I want people to understand is it's okay to take the risk to get out of something to go to your purpose and passion. So kind of take us through that journey a little bit about where you started after college to kind of where you are now.
Sure. I've rarely had a job that I didn't have some degree of influence and control over what I do. But so after college, I went and lived in Taiwan, right? The starting point for everybody in the financial services industry, right?
Yeah.
Because I was planning to go back to graduate school to pursue a degree that was in Chinese history and religion, and become a professor. So I needed to learn the language.
Wow.
And so I graduated with a BA and an MA from college, and figured I'd go on and get a PhD and become a professor. And so that, again, not lining up necessarily with the typical business degrees that people take to be in our field here. And so I was living in Taiwan, studying Chinese, having a great time, just a fantastic time in life. And I'm passionate about telling people living overseas at some point in your life is a great thing to do. It's a chance to see the rest of the world. It's a chance to both experience what it means to be an American when you come back home, but also an American abroad, and many of the great things that our country represents. And in some cases, look at different people's opinions about how the US operates or our role in the world. Anyway, and also just to meet fantastic people from around the world. So I was living in Taiwan. I'd applied for a program. I came back and I was in that program for a semester. And I was riding my bicycle quite a bit during that time, not so much working in the library as much as I probably needed to. And so I came back to New Jersey. I wasn't sure what to do. I knew school wasn't going to be for me anymore. I thought about going back to live in China or Taiwan because I learned some English, but really didn't have anything lined up. And this was the time where computers were just becoming popular in offices. And we had this Macintosh computer still with the little disk drives, the square thing that people used to have.
Yeah.
And we had a program called Quark Express. And just by way of background, my dad had owned a chain of weekly newspapers in northern New Jersey that he had sold a couple of years prior to that, and maintained a small ad agency and a little business. So I went to work for him. That was my first job, figuring out what to do, and it was part-time. And while I was there, I was on my bike a lot. I was figuring out how to use this design program, just playing around, and realized that there weren't any maps or any publications for the New York area for people like me who were becoming passionate about cycling. And you would think New York City, not a great cycling community. Wrong. There's a ton of stuff going on. At the time, there were races every weekend in Central Park. The mountain biking was just happening all around, and people were on their bikes all over the place. And so I started a bicycling magazine for the New York area that I ran for 7 years. And so that was my first job. Did some work with my dad and a couple of the other people in the ad agency. So I was following my passion of bicycling, and so to some degree, my skill that I had grown up in the newspaper business and knew how to sell an ad and write a little bit. And so I did that. It wasn't particularly lucrative, but it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
And then it was time for me to wind that down. And I was hired to run a business newspaper here in Colorado Springs. And we had a sister publication in Pueblo, which is a town about an hour south of here. And so I was hired by a company that was buying newspapers around the country, and they brought me in to do it, be the publisher here. It was just before the bubble burst around technology. A lot of our advertisers were tech companies and telephone companies. And in 2001, those advertisers went away. And the paper here was not the world's most robust in terms of profit and income. And the company wanted me to move. I didn't want to move, and didn't work out between us. And so I ended up staying here and changing careers. And as I was looking to figure out what I was going to do next, I did what you're supposed to do. I met with all my contacts, and I can't remember at the time if there were still online job boards or not. This was, 2001. So the world was 20 years ago, very different. And well, there must have been, because I had posted my email someplace, my resume someplace, and somebody found me and said, "Hey, come think about working for us in this financial services company." And as I started to go through it, I realized the work that I do hit all of my major check boxes of things that I had thought. It's getting to work with people, right, one-to-one in our meetings. It is the stock market and the investment world is always changing, so it hit the intellectual piece. There's no cap on my income, and that was important to me. And from a career perspective, I'd always had an owner's mentality in the work that I do, and I wanted to make sure I had that as well. And there was a lot to learn, and I already had a contact base, so I figured I'd be reasonably successful in a very quick period of time. That wasn't necessarily the case, but at least I had enough to whet my appetite and keep going for more. So really, I've only had a couple of jobs during my life.
Yeah, but you've had really different careers. I think the average person changes careers, I've heard, like 5 to 7 times in their lifetime. And every one of them this is what I want people to get, that every one of them, when you're telling that story, revolves around something that is a passion for you, something that you enjoy doing, love doing. And so the first one, I think it was an unbelievable story. You started your own bike magazine because you loved biking. You're in the financial services business now because you love helping with people. You love serving them, helping them, guiding them to prosperity, and in the intellectual piece. And you've had to learn different things along the way. What is the one thing that didn't scare you from going from that career to that career to that career?
Awesome. You ask great questions, by the way. One of the things I haven't really thought about in that particular level of detail. And on one level, I'm just dumb enough to jump into things that it's not that I don't have any fear for it, but when things look interesting, I'm just going to jump in and kind of see what happens. It's a little different when you're thinking about it from a career perspective, because it's a bigger commitment than say, "Hey, I'm going to jump in and learn how to play guitar," which is a lifelong commitment of its own, but you could also just put it down and forget about it. There's no economic consequence to the family. Again, I think it's going back to gifts I've gotten from my parents in many ways, and ones that I'm trying to give my children, which is have curiosity about the world. That we, all of us, I think, have the skill to do what it is that we want to do if we pursue it with passion and some degree of, being smart about it and some degree of diligence around it. That things, and I have this atmosphere for whatever reason that things tend to work out. I'm just wired as that optimist. So lots of different pieces to it that, I think most people have. We just don't give voice to it for the most part. And I tend to commit to things without thinking too much about it in advance, with the idea that for some reason I'm being pulled along towards it, and frequently, but not always, it works out.
No, and I think that's a beautiful answer, because I look at it this way too. And you kind of elaborated on this a little bit. You said we all have it. We all have that ability to do these different things. And I tell people when I go out and speak, you're all unique in your own special way. You're all special, and we're all unique. We all have gifts, and we all have all these things. The difference, Rob, in what you're saying there, and how I look at this, is this: you haven't been afraid to jump in and try different things, the curiosity piece that you mentioned and so forth. Whereas a lot of people, there's something holding them back. That little man on the shoulder that's sitting there saying, you're not good enough. You shouldn't do this. I don't think you can make it. I don't, blah, 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 blah. You kind of just flick that little man off your shoulder and say, here we go. And I think that's what's really kind of intriguing about you and your story and where you're at. And the reason for your success is because you're not afraid of that little man telling you no, because we all have those thoughts in our head that kind of hold us back. But you've been able to overcome them. And part of it is, I always tell people, you can outwork that fear. And you always had the confidence that you can adjust and make the adjustments and outwork that fear. And I just think that's a beautiful story. And somewhere along this line, so in 2001, you switched careers totally into the financial industry, helping people and serving people that way. You got married and had some kids, and this kind of set you off on a whole nother journey. So why don't you explain that a little bit?
Sure. My son, who was my first child, was born 5 days before 9/11, September 6th of 2001. And I had not yet settled on what my next career was going to be. Wow. Interesting time.
Wow.
Homeowner, new kid.
Yeah.
I'm married. I was married, not married to that. I'm not married right now. Let me give this financial services thing a try. Again, I had, in many ways, the luxury, and not necessarily the foresight, but the diligence of having enough money put away that I could survive for a period of time as I was building a business. And I don't know your audience particularly well, but I'm sure it's many people that are trying to figure out how to master their own universe, be their own boss, whether it's with a company or not, gain some degree of financial freedom and make some choices in life. And so I was at a point where I could make a choice that it wasn't going to hurt me too badly if it wasn't a good one. And so I did spend some time trying to figure out what was going to be next. I looked at potentially buying some businesses. I couldn't find anything that was interesting. I didn't have enough to last too long a period of time. And so I was going to have to find something. And again, as I was looking at kind of doing that work of what is it that I want to be doing next and what does I want to commit to, when I got this call from somebody in financial services, I didn't go to work for that company, and realized I had enjoyed a relationship with my advisor over time. And like I said, as I started thinking about it as a career, I was like, this looks just fantastic for me at this time. I had grown up in the newspaper world. I did not grow up on the writing side. When I went to work a little bit in the newspaper business, I grew up on the sales side.
Yeah.
And so that ability to pick up a phone, ask somebody to lunch, ask somebody to coffee was something that I had. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy. It's just I knew, some basic language. That was something I could jump into. And so I figured as I was getting started, I could at least meet with people and find out if it was going to work. And so I had to get a bunch of licenses and then get started. So yeah, it was a little bit of a crazy time. Yeah. And it was a time of, you talk about flicking the little man off, and in some ways I just ignore that voice that's
Yeah.
there, but it doesn't mean it does come with a degree of, I don't know if stress is the right word, but constant thought about, am I making the right decision? And if I am making the right decision, what is it? How hard do I need to work? And how can I model people that were successful to at least give myself a chance to get there?
Right. And this is called the People Progressing Podcast. So your whole journey, you're always progressing. You're always learning. You just said it, observe other people and see how they're successful in this business. So I'm learning, I'm growing, and overcoming that little bit of fear, or can I do this? Should I do this? We all have that. In my mind, most successful people are the ones who can overcome that fear, and they can just believe in themselves, and you have a complete belief in yourself. And so then your middle daughter was born. How did that, why don't you explain that and how that has changed your perspective?
I will. I want to go back to what you just said, is this belief in yourself. I think it's a belief, at least what I've learned, it's a belief in myself that's not 100% all the time, right? I'm always trying to test that belief holding water or not. I did have to make a decision at one point. I was offered a job of making a lot more money than I was to go work for, at the time, it was a bank trust company. And as an advisor, you basically build your own business. You get your own clients, and whether I work at company A, B, or C at the time, you get some kind of payout based on what you bring in. There's no salaries, typically no guarantees. And I had to spend some time thinking about that offer.
Yeah.
And yet what I realized was that one of the reasons I was doing what I was doing was so I would not have a cap on the work that I would do, and that I would not have to answer to bureaucracy, because I'm not good with that. Now, some people are. And after some searching, I decided not to take that offer. But you're right, it was a belief in myself that I could get there. I was going to have to work to get there. I was going to have to learn to get there. I was going to have to commit. And I'm really glad that I made that decision. And again, really glad that I've got that belief. And I hope in your audience too, that that's something you and I probably agree on 100%. We all have it within us.
Yes.
So when we find that inner voice that tells us, keep moving ahead, things usually work out. But that's how I look at it.
Well, and I we'll get back to your daughter here in a second, because now you got me going a little bit. Your self-awareness of what your passion is and what your purpose is and what you like to do and what your strengths are. I think that's an important piece of where you're at, because you had a job offer. You just said you had a job offer that was going to pay you a lot more than what you were making at that point. But your self-awareness said, I don't really want to work for someone else. I know who I am. I want to I want to be my boss. I want to be in control of my destiny. And I think that's important too, that people have a self-awareness and they take some time to understand who they are, what they like, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and what they can bring to the world, instead of just kind of going day by day and punching a clock and going to the next thing. Your self-awareness is unbelievable, and your confidence in your self-awareness is unbelievable. You don't waver from that.
Yeah. And look, I think to some degree that's a learned skill, and to some degree that's a commitment. On some point you say, this is the day.
Yeah.
And I see it in financial planning and people's ability to create wealth. And I talk about this in my books. It's that day, saying today is the day for change. Yeah. It's not easy. It's not done at that point.
Right.
And I feel like that self-confidence is a skill, because I don't think I had it when I was younger. I think I'm perceived that way often. But whatever the internal monologue is always going to be a little different. And that's where listening to podcasts like this, reading books about how do you develop your mind, your heart, and the connection between those two I think has been invaluable to me.
Yeah.
So,
you keep growing and progressing. Yeah. There's a saying in baseball that baseball is a great game because there's no clock to tell you when it's over. Yeah. And I put that analogy to growth and progression. There's no clock that's ever going to tell us that our growth and our progression is over. And that's what you do on a daily basis. And now you're helping so many people and so many families you took your financial advisory planning business part and you kind of created a special space for it. Why don't you
Mhm.
explain that a little bit to our
Sure.
listeners?
Yeah, so I had started in the financial planning world when my son was like 6 months to a year old, somewhere in that ballpark. And my second daughter was born 18 months after he was born, and she has Down syndrome. And when I grew up, it was a time when nobody knew. The people who had intellectual and developmental disabilities were in a different classroom. You never saw anybody. So in the world I grew up in, there were just not a lot of people in my life who had any kind of disability. And so having Sarah was all new in terms of everything, my parenting style in life,
Yeah.
the fact that we needed new doctors and new therapists and what her outcomes might be. And she's 19 years old now. If she walked in the door here, she might not say hello because she's now, a 19-year-old kid, but she could easily say hello and keep us captivated for a couple of minutes before she went and did her own thing. So she's at her program right now, and her health is good, and she's a lovely person. But again, I didn't know anything about what those futures were going to look like. She actually was in the hospital for 6 weeks when she was born with heart issues and something that looked like liver and other issues that were coming up, and those all didn't automatically resolve. She had heart surgery at 6 months. So that first year with Sarah was a pretty bumpy ride.
Yeah.
Learned a lot what it means to care for somebody who's completely helpless and who isn't making those forward progression marks in the way that we expect. So learned a lot about parenting, about kids, about what futures could look like. And then during that year somewhere, I started to try and figure out, what do I need to do differently for my family to preserve a positive future for her and fund a positive future for her? And what are the differences? Again, I was a fairly new financial planner, but I'd sort of gotten the idea that if I'm planning for families like mine at the time, I might be looking at some college funding. I have some term life insurance. I need a basic will, but all of it with the idea that my son, who is a typical person, would grow up, leave the house, get a job, go to college, get a job, or get a job, or whatever. Who knew? But for her, it was looking very different because people with Down syndrome have a wide range of abilities, and we weren't going to know at one what that was going to look like. And so that first year or two, I just went out and I met with everybody I thought could be helpful to me, both from a personal, selfish perspective, but then also with the idea of learning that, hey, I know there are other families going through these same issues that I am. Some of them have kiddos that are newborns like mine, some of them teenagers, some of them adults with developmental disabilities, and just really went in with the idea of, let me learn and listen, and hey, what needs to look different? Well, it turns out that there are certain government benefits that are available that can be lost if planning isn't done the right way. And then it turns out that life expectancies for people with developmental disabilities have just increased dramatically. And so while in the prior generation, maybe I would have thought that my daughter would predecease me, it's unlikely that'll be the case now. So how do I start to plan for a second generation? And then there's all these rules that the government imposes to be able to have monies available. So I had to become familiar with those rules. And then there's a whole host of nonprofits that serve people in different ways. So there's a wide spectrum of things that I needed to learn that weren't necessarily day-to-day investment decisions or even day-to-day financial plan decisions. But I wanted to know this sort of total picture of what life could be like, where resources are available, who could be supportive, and what happens if something happens to me tomorrow. So that when I sit with a family, or I speak in front of a group, or I write another newsletter or book, it has a little bit more depth to it than just, what did the market do today, which is hugely important, but what did the market do today, and how does that impact your future for these families, and what decisions are you making in your legal life and your estate planning life? So that was all kind of the first year or two when she was born, and 3 years later we had another kid. And so I was trying to think through how to organize this and how to help my family, how to help the families I work with. And somewhere along the way, I started speaking to local groups and realized that there were some books in there. And so started down a path of expanding the way I communicate with people and the number of people that I could reach. And that has truly become an area of passion for me. I can only work with so many people, but there's so many people that I found need help and need direction. And so my work has really changed over the time, and things like, what we're doing now, Zoom calls and podcasts and speaking to national groups, either through the computer or in person. It turns out I have a talent for it, I think. So far, the reviews are pretty good.
Yeah,
I love doing it. And more importantly, it's an area I can really give back and help people.
So your first book was your first book, The Financial Freedom Special Needs Family, 9 Building Blocks to Reduce Stress and Preserve Benefits. Was that your first one?
So that was the book I first started working on and just couldn't get it to come together. I had a call from a mom in, I think it was the US Virgin Islands, and they had a question about life insurance. And I was trying to explain to her my theory around life insurance, and I wasn't doing a particularly good job of it. So I just sat down over the next week and wrote what was the first book, which is Protect Your Family. Okay. It's a short book on life insurance. I suppose you call it more of a pamphlet, but I call it a book. But it's a very short book. That was the first one, and it just came out quickly. Had an editor, got it up and running. The second one is the Financial Freedom book, and then the third one is Protect Your Family. And sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The building blocks one is really my thinking of the process and order that seems to work best for people in my shoes. And it doesn't start with, do you have an IRA or 401k or an investment account? It starts with, I always call it the world's greatest financial planning tool, a pen and a notebook or a piece of paper. And what is it that you want? What is your future? What are some of those things in your future that are going to be there? Everything else will fall into place around that.
So is that your first building block? Get a pen and paper?
That's the first step in the first building block. Envision your future is basically the idea there.
Okay.
Yeah, let's spend some time thinking about what you want out of life for yourself and for every family member. There's some other exercises in there, but yeah, that's basically the first.
So in other words, kind of start with the end in mind.
Yeah. And we don't know, like in baseball, we don't know when that end is coming, and we don't know what the end is going to be. But yeah, let's start dreaming about what we want.
So without giving away the whole book, can you talk a little bit about a couple more building blocks?
Yeah. And I'll talk about why I start with the pen and paper. Is that for many years locally, I'd speak about this thing called the Special Needs Trust, which is an important tool that we use, and that's one of the building blocks. And I'd speak about getting out of debt and saving for long term and some investing basics. And sometimes I realized once I went back to this almost the same audience, and the audience I always ask how many people have heard of special needs trusts and how many people have one. And from one year to the next, the needle had moved a little bit. Obviously, everybody had heard about it at that point, but I thought uptake would be, double what it initially was, and it wasn't. And it made me think that, it's not the knowledge that matters; it's the desire to put knowledge into action that matters. And so I've changed my talks to be far less technical and much more, hey, you got this, encouraging, laying out the case, but also working on the motivational side. Because change doesn't happen unless we commit in our hearts to do it. And that can come from so many different directions, and that conscious awareness of the desire to change and to take steps is more important than whether the trust says heretofore or therefore on it, right? So we can hire people to do all that good stuff. So that's why that first part of the book is so important. The Special Needs Trust is a cornerstone of planning. And I say, even if I do a great job with people and create hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of assets for them, all of that can be considered wasted money if that money goes to the individual with a disability. So in my case, if I leave money directly to my daughter and it's more than $2,000, she will lose her government funded benefits.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So there's an income benefit called SSI, and then there's Medicaid. And the income benefit's important. It's, I think, $825 a month. Many of the families I work with can replace that income. What they can't replace are Medicaid funded services, which is health insurance for my daughter. And there's supported living environments and supported work environments that come through that to help her be in society that can be worth millions of dollars for people over their lifetime. And so the special needs trust is a huge part of the planning work we do. And so one of the building blocks explains what it is, the purpose of it, and how to think about it. And Protect Your Family, that next book, is much more deeper dive into that. And so then the other ones are get out of debt, save for retirement, have good life insurance in place, and then touch on this idea of funding trusts in the future. It really takes people through those first steps to get to where people need to be, and then pushes them along. But hopefully they get good help from attorneys, CPAs, and financial planners to get them there.
So when you're talking about this, Rob, because families with special needs, and you kind of mentioned it, families with special needs are going to be with that special needs child the whole time, right? Most of them don't go out and get a job in work and do all those things. They can't, they will get that, but they'll still be living with you. Is it?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yes and no. The world keeps changing. And when my daughter was born almost 20 years ago, things were really opening up. Now, they're not great, but there are college programs for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There are many nonprofits. So if I want my daughter, and I do want my daughter at some point to live independently of me for her own benefit, as well as, you want mine at some point, there are nonprofits that have supported housing. So she might live in an apartment with somebody, and they'll come in and check on her twice a day, kind of thing.
Okay.
I have clients who have children that are in wheelchairs and are deaf in wheelchairs, or who are blind and a developmental disability. And so chances are those people will live at home for most of their lives. But even there are a range of options now that if something were to happen to the parents, that person would still be in a safe place. But yeah, the idea is that chances are I will be either, in my case, my daughter either will live here, and she won't have all the same opportunities that most of us have for work and social life. And so as a parent, I'll have those responsibilities, but as a financial planner, I'll help people figure out how to fund those in the future as well.
Tell us a couple things with people who don't have a special needs child. What is some eye-opening things that you can give us to understand what you go through or where you're coming from?
Yeah. The biggest thing I heard when my daughter was born was, as we talked to parents of people who had family members with Down syndrome, which my daughter has, or autism, or there's a whole bunch of different reasons why. The hardest thing for me to get my head around was every single person I talked to said that they would not change a thing. And I think that is, as people think about my family or think about families like mine, something that is surprising. Like if I could have a magic wand and wipe away my daughter having Down syndrome, I don't think I would do it. There are parts of her having Down syndrome that I would. I wish she could think about the future a little bit more. She's very present in her moments. She can read about a second or third grade level. And so I wish she had a little bit of math skills at maybe a fourth or fifth grade level. And if she could read it at fifth grade level, she could be in society in many ways. So unlocking that next piece of opportunity for her is something I would wave away. On the other hand, she's a lovely person. She, again, at this part of her teenage years, not so much, but when we go into a restaurant, we sit down, the four of us, my other two kids and I look at the menus and we start talking. And when the waitress or waiter comes up, Sarah is engaging with that person as a person, not just as a waiter, more than the rest of us. And so something I've learned from her is, hey, take the time and enjoy it. And she'll compliment somebody, I won't do it, but she'll compliment a waitress. Oh, you look pretty today. And it just lightens up that person's entire day.
Yeah.
And so there are these moments of connection with other people that we have 100% because of my daughter, Sarah. It's just fascinating to be out. So we were in New York, visiting my parents in New Jersey, and we were in New York last week. And we went to Chicago, the play on Broadway. And we were getting our usual picture under the marquee afterwards, and busy streets. And we were trying to figure out how we're going to the car and what was going to happen next. And we waited long enough, and one of the stars came out, and nobody recognized her. And she was just getting into her car. And we just said, hey, I said, really great show. And she was looking right at Sarah, not the rest of us. And she just kind of lit up in a different way,
Yeah.
and engaged with us. And we talked for a couple of minutes. And if it had just been the rest of us, we wouldn't have had that same experience in the same way.
Yeah.
So there's something that a tenderness of heart that she brings out in other people. Yeah, and she has a wicked sense of humor, and sometimes surprises us with how much she does track with what's going on and makes some kind of joke, often an ironic joke that none of us are expecting, and puts us down in laughter. So those kinds of moments in that part of life I never would have had without having her. And I hear that from many other families. That doesn't mean there's not extra work.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, all through school, we really had to struggle to help her get as far as she could get with her work, and that we have these unknowns about where she will land in the future for her social life, her work life, and her family life. But I have that about my other children as well. I just have a little bit more of it for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way to describe that. So I want to dive into a little bit of perspective. We've kind of talked a little bit about perspective a little bit, and you kind of talked a little bit about with Sarah. How did your life or your perspective on life change when she was born? And how was that changed from when she's born to where she is now at 19? Because I bet you it had some kind of effect on your perspective of the world.
Oh, absolutely. When she was born, there was a huge amount of fear. I didn't know what her life was going to be like. I didn't know what my life was going to be like. Very quickly started talking with lots of people about how life is in many ways different, for the better in some and for the worse in some. And so one of the things we did when she was in the hospital for those first 6 weeks, and again, I think this is that approach of let's just dive in. Life is happening.
Yeah.
Let's make those, the faster we can flip that switch to learning, the better. And so we went to Down Syndrome Association meetings. The board meetings were held in the hospital where she was. We went to a teen group to see what people are like at that age, and to start to embrace what was coming at us. Our doctor gave us a great quote, and I think it's a Joseph Campbell quote, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but it's you have to be ready to give. You have to be willing to give up the life you thought you were going to have to be able to embrace the life you're going to have.
Wow.
And so it's something like that. It's that idea of, we thought we were going down one road. That road is different. And the quicker, in our case, that I felt like the quicker I could get to finding out what the new world was going to look like, the more I could embrace it. And so
Awesome.
that was and so that sense of, and it was so clear, we're often looking back and saying, oh yeah, this is when I started to make that change. So I think one of the things I learned is when change is coming, I don't necessarily have to make the change happen fast, but embracing what's coming and being open to it. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned. I've learned to enjoy every day more, just because you never know what's going to happen. You have somebody fragile in your life, especially at that age, and somebody who looks like the odds are stacked against them, who's often having a better time than anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why can't I do that?
Right.
Why do I always have to be caught up in thinking about what's coming tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now? I know I love having targets in place and goals and direction for my life, and yet we live in the present moment. And so that's something I've learned from her quite a bit.
That's
And
beautiful. The thing about it, Rob, what I'm getting from your story here is your daughter's perspective has changed your perspective for the better.
yeah,
And how beautiful is that? Because in life, to me, that's what it's about. It's about helping people see life in a better way, see life in a more joyful way, a more fulfilled way. And it sounds to me, and I have friends who have Down syndrome children as well, and I almost get the same story for every single one of them. They change your perspective for the better on life. So as you're talking to families who might not have special needs kids, what's one thing you could tell them to understand a little bit more about Down syndrome people? How can they empathize more with them? Or
yeah, and not just people with Down syndrome, but anybody they might come across who's got, let's call it developmental disability, or somebody who might have autism. Or one of the things I've learned when my kids got to elementary school that I think will get to the point is in their classroom. So my daughter had Down syndrome. There were other people with learning disabilities. There were other people who were high achievers. There were other people who like math. And so you had 20 something kids. All of them were different in some way.
Yes.
And while our school wasn't perfect at it, kids were getting pulled out for different things. So some of the high readers would go to a group, with the other high readers. And then the math kids would go to the math, and then my daughter would go to her speech therapist. And again, it wasn't perfect, but what I liked was the school was willing to come to the point where the people are and do the best for each of them. And so that's my feeling in the interactions I have with people with developmental disabilities, and that other people hopefully will have as well, is they're not that different, right? They're different in some ways, but they're people. And again, sometimes my daughter can be super happy. Like, people think people with Down syndrome are always happy. She can be a moody 19-year-old as well. And so it's that approach of just trying to find out where people are and meet them there, rather than come with the preconceived notions of what people can or cannot do. And any chance you can open the door a little bit to a conversation, open the door to, is there a way I can employ somebody who might be a little bit different? And I'll give you an example. There's an organization here that does serve people with developmental disabilities. They take apart electronics. And so their mission is, the nonprofit is to help people with developmental disabilities, and they mostly hire people with autism, because the group of people with autism that they hire are typically not social when they come in. They like a task-oriented environment, and they like to have a sense of purpose. And so, I bring like an old TV there. They take it apart to strip into their components. The metals go here, the batteries go there. And what they find over time is that many of those people who are not particularly social, who are then in an environment where they're valued and have some purpose, start to blossom as people.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't do that for everybody. But, if you're in a party and there's somebody with Down syndrome or autism, say hello, right? It's just that simple sometimes, and just ask how they're doing. And the more we can just do the little things to bring people in, frankly, the richer our lives become, because we're going to experience life in a new way.
No, it's beautiful. And two things I got from that, and you can chime in. One is, again, we're all unique and special in our own way. Doesn't matter who we are. Doesn't matter the color of our skin. Doesn't matter if we have Down syndrome, don't have Down syndrome, autism, not autism. We're all unique and we're all special. And then the second thing that really struck me, and I got goosebumps thinking about this right now when you said this, that organizations that's taking in those autism kids and putting them to work and giving them a purpose. And when they have that purpose, they're really happy and fulfilled and everything else. That's no different than anybody in the world. That's no different for anybody. No. That's no different for me. It's no different for you. We all need to be living in our purpose to have fulfillment. And that's what I want people to get from this is we're all human beings. Some of us are different. We're all different. We're all unique. We're all special. And we all want to live in our purpose. And when we give people a purpose, no matter if they have Down syndrome, they have autism, they don't have autism, whatever it might be, we can give people a purpose for being here, and they can find that purpose and live in it. They're going to be more fulfilled. And what a beautiful way you just describe that, Rob. I think that's going to help a lot of people kind of get a better, broader understanding. I do have a question for you back to your books and back to your work with families. What if a family all of a sudden didn't really know what you're doing and how you can help them? And let's say their child is the same age as your child. They're 19 now, but they haven't done any of the financial planning and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Is it too late? Can they still dive into it, or what would you suggest there?
And it's never too late. The past is the past. If you didn't know about something, or more likely people sort of know they're supposed to do something, but just haven't committed to it.
Yeah.
But today's the day to do it. I was speaking at a workshop, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, and a woman came in who was young 70s, low 70s or so. She had some children who developmental disabilities, and had never heard of all of these things that I talk about in my books.
Right.
And she stayed afterwards, and you could see this look of fear and worry on her face. And we happened to be in the right place because in every state it's a little bit different, but the place I was giving the talk was the entryway to certain kinds of things in Colorado. And so I was able to bring her upstairs and meet with somebody right away. And then subsequently she came in and she got in touch with an attorney that fixed her estate plan, which was not done right. She had some assets that were a problem in the way that they were titled, and we worked through that. And so, I call her my box lady. She used to come into my office with this big box of stuff. And my goal for the box lady was that she would come into the office just with her handbag, because I would know at that point she would feel comfortable that her legal and financial life is taken care of.
Yeah.
And that if something had happened to her sons would be taken care of. And it took, in her case, more than a year to get there. Usually doesn't take that long. No, pretty much everything can be fixed. Sometimes it's a matter of time and money, but most of the time it's a matter of intent and action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good way to put it. And I think that's going to help a lot of people here. Now, how can people get a hold of you and get your books?
Yep. They can go, the spelling of my name is always what confuses people. It's Rob Wrubel. So they can go to robrubel.com, ROBWRUBEL.com. They can search on Amazon for my books, but they can go to a local bookstore and order it. And then for financial planning, and again, this is a separate part of the work that I do on the financial planning side, they can put in Rob Wrubel, Colorado Springs investments, and I'll pop up with my Cascade Investment Group there, and they can call. So those are different channels that people can get. But again, what I hear from the books is that it's a great starting point for people. It's not Tolstoy. It's not that hard to read. We try and make it simple. There's some action items in in almost every chapter. And that's often a great start to go, or people can just, find the website and send me a note if you need to. And then I think I have a Facebook. It's Ask Rob Wrubel on the Facebook channel as well. Okay. And so I used to post once a week there. I'll get back to that soon.
And they can get a hold of you through your website if they want you to come speak to their group and so forth.
Absolutely.
Well too, right?
Yeah, there's a contact form for whatever somebody might need there. Yeah.
Beautiful work. Okay, I have 3 questions left and we'll be done.
Sure.
Okay, first one is, my book is called The 3 Ps, Finding Your Purpose, Perspective, and Passion. What is Rob Wrubel's purpose in life?
I always say I wish I had one.
Yeah, and you could have more than one. I want people to understand that. Yes. Yes.
So part of my purpose
beautiful.
Is to continue what I think is a legacy from my parents, is to be a great parent and raise children that can go on and become independent and successful in whatever way that's important to them. I've picked up this purpose of being a good community member, and I've been quite a bit involved in the Colorado Springs community, but now I think my work, my speaking, my newsletters is to help this community of families with developmental disabilities, who have a special needs member. And then, frankly, to create the income for the life that I want to go. I don't know so much that's a purpose, but that's probably a tangible result of the activities that I do.
Okay, now I'm going to skip perspective and go to passion and come back to perspective. So what's your passion in life?
I love the creative output that comes from writing and speaking. It's really something I wish I'd figured out a little bit earlier, but you figure it out when you figure it out. I love being outside. It's one of the reasons I live in Colorado. I've got a trail 2 blocks from me that I can go on, and I'm from outside New York City in suburban New Jersey. 15 minutes, I feel like I'm in wilderness. I don't ever need to run into a bear, but that's a whole different issue. So I think those are my passions. And then on some level, just living a great life. So when I'm whatever old is these days, let's call it 90, 95, and I'm looking back, it's that sort of front porch conversation. When you look back, are you happy with the things that you did, the choices you made in life that you led? I really have a strong passion for being able to look back and say yes. And I haven't quite gotten to all those things yet, but I'm getting there.
No, and I think it's beautiful, because I say that purpose equals passion and passion equals purpose. Mm-hmm. And your perspective holds it together. So when we look at your purpose, you talked about it's all based on service. It's all based on serving others. That's what's in your heart. All the things that you talked about, having my kids grow up and be basically productive members of society, be out there on their own and doing great things for the society, and That was your first purpose. Then your other purpose was helping families with special needs. So it's all based on your service to others. And then your passion's kind of the same, even your bike riding, because the first passion you said was the creative things that you can do with your speaking and writing and all those things. Well, what's that all do? That's all serving someone else. You're all trying to help them. You're trying to give them something better for their lives. And when you ride your bike, you love doing that. And how many times when you're riding your bike, do those thoughts come into your head of, hey, I could say this the next time, or I could do this the next time. And that's all based on serving others. And so I think that's beautiful. And what holds that together, Rob, is your perspective. And you've kind of touched on it a little bit with your daughter and some of the things you've been through in your life. What is your true perspective on life?
Wow, I'm not going to be able to answer that one. I feel like it's come out as I've been talking with you. It's just this sense that we live in a world that we get to play in quite a bit, and we get to make the most of it. Stuff's going to be thrown at us. Life is going to change. We're going to have hardships. And I suppose my perspective is that it's all part of life, and the highs and lows all come together. And this isn't quite my perspective, but it is an attitude. And when I got divorced, I'd heard a song by the band called "Life is a Carnival." And that was sort of, when you think about a carnival, sometimes you're on a frightening ride. Sometimes you're walking down where all the game people are, and they're trying to hook you in. And sometimes you throw the baseball and you knock over the cans all at once, and it's a great moment. And there's all highs and lows. And I don't think that's my perspective, but I think that's been my operating philosophy for the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I have a saying that the old saying, life's a marathon. I don't think it's a marathon. I think it's a steeplechase. A steeplechase and track is where you run along and you jump over things down into water, come out and keep going, and you have to keep getting over those hurdles. And it's kind of the same thing with your carnival thing. I've never heard that before, and I think that's beautiful. I want to thank you for coming on, Rob. I think this is going to help a lot of people, and that's what this is about. It's helping people progress, grow, and progress in their life. And that's what you just did again today. And you're doing that on a daily basis with so many people. And I hope people get a hold of you to get your books, get a hold of you to come speak to their groups. You have a lot to give people, and you're just a beautiful person. And I really appreciate you coming on and spending this time with us this morning. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And thank you for keeping people excited, motivated, educated, and having guests that give different perspectives on life. We're all going to jump in and find something every time we listen to podcasts like yours. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, you're awesome. Thanks, Rob.
Yep.
Thank you so much for listening to today's edition of the People Progressing Podcast. I'm Joe White. You can get a hold of me through CoachJoeWhiteConsulting.com and get my book off of my website. Get a hold of me through CoachJoeWhite97@gmail.com. If you want me to come speak to your group, I've had a lot of good speaking engagements lately and so forth. And if you want to talk to me about my Vistage Peer Advisory Group for CEOs and business owners and business leaders, it's a great group of people we got going, and just a lot of learning and growth there too as well. So I hope you have a great day, and keep listening, keep downloading, keep sharing this with your friends. Let's keep building this and helping people progress. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.